Hello, everybody, and welcome to JFK, the final investigation. Today's episode is on the Rockefeller Commission, which is episode 7. So, to give a little bit of a summary here, and if you look at all my podcast episodes and stuff, how do I say this? I think there's a circumstantial case that can be built for the involvement of David Rockefeller and Nelson Rockefeller in the JFK assassination. I at least think it needs to be researched significantly further. I will say if you were to, have some sort of trial with the evidence that's present right now, I think it's pretty clear they would be found not guilty. There certainly are questions that would need to be answered. There's behaviors that just don't make sense and actions that don't make sense. I will say that it does appear there would be a good chance that maybe Nelson Rockefeller could have been convicted of obstruction of justice related to this case. When you look at this report that we're going to talk about and see how far off it was, you got to ask some pretty serious questions. And that's what we're going to do here. So let's get right into it here. One thing to mention, the Warren Commission itself had the 8 people in it that had ties to the Rockefellers in one way, shape, or form, whether it was a nonprofit, or one of their corporations, or the government agency. So there's a lot of overlap with the Rockefellers on the Warren Commission. And then when we get to the Rockefeller Commission itself, you got, of course, Nelson Rockefeller heading the commission, and you have Bellin, who was also on the Warren Commission. And Bellin is a very prominent member of the Rockefeller Commission. He was one of the most active investigators. So let's start off by just saying the report itself states that there is no evidence suggesting E. Howard Hunt was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. They discuss evidence of CIA employees corroborating Hunt's story, and his family said he was home in Washington, D.C. They restate this story, and they state he was home at the time of the assassination. Well, we know this right off the bat is 100% wrong. Hunt was caught lying about being in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, in a 1980s court case. He was caught lying so bad that the CIA stopped kind of like having his back on this matter and, essentially said, yeah, he probably was in Dallas that day. So we have that. And then his deathbed confession, where he admits being part of the assassination and being in Dallas that day. So he literally admitted what the Rockefeller Commission said didn't happen. So they're completely wrong on this issue. And let's not forget, Nelson Rockefeller had pretty substantial ties to the Central Intelligence Agency. There was a point in time where it's not really clear whether he was an employee of the CIA or he was working on some special project. But according to his biographer, he would get upset when internal CIA documents did not properly reflect his CIA titles, for whatever that means. So he was clearly involved with the CIA and also very proud of it. So there's also a great deal of time put into the photos of the 3 tramps, which everybody knows about, which likely did not include Hunter Sturgis. I'll admit that, although there were some similarities in the looks of these men. So that's the real question is, why is it that there are 2 men, these 3 out of these 3 champs, that look like Hunt and Sturgis? The CIA is notorious for using doubles and things like that. And were they trying to set up Hunt so someday they could hang this whole thing on him or what? But it's very interesting, the similarities with the looks. But I'm going to go with, I will agree with the commission here that, that's not Hunt and Sturgis in those photos. But then they go on to conclude that there's no evidence of a shot from the front. We all know that this is 100% wrong. They do not bring up the conflicting stories about the Mauser or the British Enfield rifle. because they say that there's no evidence any other weapon was involved. So they ignore evidence that was even, had to be dealt with around the time of the Warren Commission. So they say a shot fired from the front or the direct front of the presidential car can be ruled out. Such a bullet would have to pass through the windshield of the car unless fired from above the overpass just ahead of the presidential car. There were no holes in the windshield, and the overpass was guarded by 2 policemen in the presence of some 15 railroad employees. None of them saw or heard any shooting take place from the overpass. This is another statement that is kind of like partially true, partially untrue, and we'll get into it here in a second. They also hired panel experts to analyze the evidence independently, and they both concluded 2 shots only from the rear. Dr. Spitz, Lindenberg, and Hodges all determined that a neuromuscular reaction is the reason for the rapid rear back into the left movement of Kennedy. This has been completely debunked. Then they also get into the jet effect, which has also been debunked, and we'll talk about that a little bit more a little further down the line here. So the theory they came up with, it's extremely deceptive because they are partially true with the neuromuscular reaction and the jet effect. They are things, but they are what we call minor things. So though they do happen, they in no way, shape, or form can possibly explain what happened to Kennedy. So according to ChatGPT, Kennedy moves backwards and to the left. A neuromuscular spasm would be symmetrical or unpredictable, not directional. The leftward component is especially hard to explain with a simple spasm or jet effect. Doctors also state that a localized muscle reaction in the head and neck wouldn't easily produce a strong torso displacement. In short, a neuromuscular reaction is possible, but it's a small effect and can't explain what happened to Kennedy. With the jet effect, it can explain a small amount of brain matter going back in the direction of the shooter, but it does not in any way allow for the massive amount of brain matter that landed at least 10 feet behind Kennedy and possibly as much as 25 feet. The Rockefeller Commission of 1975 said that the medical evidence suggests 2 shots from behind, but the HFCA concluded there was a conspiracy in 1979 based on the inconsistent medical evidence. In short, this means they believe the medical evidence does suggest a shot from the front. Another claim of the Rockefeller Commission is that there is no credible evidence that either Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby was ever employed by the CIA or even acted for the CIA in any capacity whatever, either directly or indirectly. And this isn't an area of particular interest to me, but it has become clear that the CIA had extensive files on Oswald, managed by James Jesus Angleton. Oswald was also clearly hanging around several figures with very close ties to the CIA. So the statement is, at a minimum, misleading. So in short, the Rockefeller Commission concludes there is no credible evidence of any CIA involvement in the JFK assassination. So here's some questions that certainly need to be asked and answered. Number 1, why was Bellin, a Warren Commission member, even allowed on the commission? It's a serious conflict of interest. It's kind of like having Dulles on the Warren Commission when he was fired by JFK. It just doesn't make any sense. Also, why was Rockefeller's commission wrong about almost every one of its conclusions? Rockefeller was a really smart guy. How could his commission be proven in history to be 90% false? Why did the HSCA, just 4 years later, conclude there was likely a conspiracy? So, as many of you know, my wind analysis proves there was a shot from the front. There's no question about that. There's a whole bunch of other researchers that have done work on the medical evidence. I'd also reference the Chokeholds book by D'Ingenio and his crew. They shut down a lot of stuff here that was in the Rockefeller Commission. But the neuromuscular reaction and jet effect, though they are capable of having a small effect, have been proven not to be the cause of Kennedy's, backward and left movement here. So, again, everything in their report was wrong. Let's go back to some of their other comments here. Number one, that a bullet would have to pass through the windshield of the car unless fired from above the overpass. Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily true because it depended. You could have fired from the south knoll, or you could have fired from the spot where the grassy knoll meets the triple underpass. And I'm pretty sure that windshield would not be in the way. And despite that, there is evidence that there is a through and through hole bullet in the windshield. There's all sorts of problems with the chain of evidence with the windshield itself. There's no documentation and there's conflicting reports. And at Parkland, there were several people that reported a through and through hole that you could stick a pencil through. So there is a hole in the windshield, or at least several people saw that. You'd have to weigh that evidence against, some of the official reports. And, again, when you look at the witness intimidation that's been proven in this case, witness coercion and all these things, you just can't trust anything that the government did related to this case. They lied. And, I don't care whether you believe whether Oswald acted alone or not, but one thing is 100% certain is that the government completely screwed up its case against Oswald with the way they handled this investigation. There is absolutely no way in today's day and a fair trial he would get convicted. I've done another report on this that shows it's less than 20% chance just on 4 pieces of evidence. So when you look at all the evidence, it's a virtual 0% chance he gets convicted. So let's talk about these witnesses on the overpass. Why are they focusing on the overpass? Yes, there were 2 people on the overpass that were witnesses, and 15, and there were 2 police officers, right? But they say here that they didn't see anybody on the overpass. Well, that's misleading because there were 2 witnesses in that area that said that they, saw commotion and saw smoke in an area very close to the overpass. So why was that information left out of the Rockefeller Commission report? Doesn't make sense. Why are they only talking about the overpass? Yeah, I think everybody can agree it's likely that no shots came at that presidential motorcade from the actual overpass. I would think that most people tend to think that there were shots that happened from both sides of it. So again, very deceptive use of testimony here, saying none of them saw or heard anything that took place from over the overpass. Not only did they saw and hear, they smelled. They smelled cordite from the discharge of a weapon. And based on the spots that they were in, there was no way that that smell could have come from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. It would have had to fought a 17-mile-per-hour wind. It's just not possible. So in sum here, the Rockefeller Commission was just more trash. And I'm surprised Nelson Rockefeller put his name on a report like this. He had to have known it would be destroyed later on in time. So I just don't get it. He's just wrong about everything. Take your own meanings and conclusions from that. Again, is it some kind of evidence that Nelson Rockefeller was involved? No. But it's just more stuff that's like, why'd you behave this way? What were you doing? What were you thinking? Were you hiding something? These are questions we may never get the answer to. But that's it for the Rockefeller Commission today. Thank you for listening.